Welcome back to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler, and on today's episode, I interview Suzanne Falter. She's an author, speaker, blogger, and the host of the Self-Care for Extremely Busy Women podcast. Now sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. What is up, podcast land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler, and before I introduce my guest, Suzanne Falter, who I think you guys are really going to love, and she's probably going to share some really intimate stuff about her life and share who she is, and it's a really powerful story. So I'm really excited to share that with you guys. I want to first apologize, everybody. It's been a bit since I put one out. I started getting some, I'm towards the end of my police career, and as a cop, you know, I haven't really taken any sick days, and I haven't gotten a lot of things fixed that I needed to get fixed because I didn't want to be the guy that screwed someone else over to cover my shifts or whatever the case might be. So I'm now in the process of my exit strategy from law enforcement. So I have to, get some medical stuff done. And I didn't really know what that landscape was going to look like. So I just sort of put podcasting on a pause. So I apologize, but for those of you that continue to download, I truly do appreciate that. Which leads me to where can you find the podcast? Pretty much anywhere that you listen to podcasts, you can find it, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, Pandora, iHeart, whatever. All you have to do is look up Two Dates and a Dash and hit that subscribe button. I would truly appreciate it. You can find me on YouTube. I record all these on video, and that's at Matt Cubbler. That's just my name. Please subscribe and hit that little bell dingy thing to get the notifications when I put out a new video. And there's other stuff, other media content I put out on there as well, if you're interested in any of that. Where you can learn more about me, go to mattcubbler.com. And on there, you can learn more about the book I wrote in 2006. Let's see if I can find a better angle. There we go. About my brother, Andy. It's called A Brother's Love, a Memoir. You can buy it on Amazon or wherever books are sold, but you can also order it through the website. And the book details my life growing up with my brother, Andy, who was 2.5 years older and autistic and a severe stutterer, who sadly was killed in a car accident in 1989 when he was 21 and I was 18. And so it just details our life together and how his death impacted my life. And the book, after, a long time, however many years that's been, 15 years since I wrote it, is still going strong. And it's because you guys are sharing it and sharing the good news. So without further ado, my friend, Suzanne, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Matt.
I'm excited. So, and a little shout out, and I try to do this every time I have a Podmatch person that we meet on Podmatch. So Podmatch was set up by Alex Sanfilippo, who was a guest on my show, and before there was a Podmatch. And it's just a really cool social meeting place where people are trying to get on podcasts and people at podcasts can connect, and that's how we connected. So I'm excited that you're on. So
Me too. Podmatch is great.
Not many people, may not know you through in my network, and hopefully soon they will. But today we found out that we both have something in common, that you're a Philly girl. And that's pretty cool, because there's not many people that I have on the show that are from another state when you're in California now, that know where I'm from and knows the neighborhoods and the areas where we grew up. And I think that's exciting. And now I'm going to ask there's a simple answer to this question and a more complex answer to this question, because clearly weather-wise, California is better, right?
It depends on what you mean by better, because seriously, I miss winter. I miss fall. We have a fall, which is a whole lot of oak trees turn brown and the leaves fall off, and there is no wonderful color. Okay, excuse me. In the Sierras, you can see some color, but a lot of California, where I live in the Bay Area, not color. I miss it.
Yeah, the Four Seasons. I've never lived anywhere long enough to not experience that. I've lived in Germany, but they all have similar. They're along the same, latitude, so they have the same Four Seasons component. So I've never lived anywhere where they didn't have the seasons, and I think I would truly miss that if I didn't experience. Now I have lots of trees on my property, and I spent the day mowing and mulching them up, and that's the part I hate.
I was just going to say, you're cleaning up, right?
But but I wouldn't trade it because it is it's almost like a signifier of a change, right? When you see the leaves start to change color and then they fall and they're on the ground, and you're in the middle of it with fall, and winter's right around the corner. And I went for a walk today. I go for a walk every day, and it was 40 degrees and windy and brisk, and I had my knit hat on and a sweatshirt, and it's just I like this time of year, and I think I would miss it living in California. But would you say is if you had to say an improvement in living in California versus the East Coast, what would it be?
Well, I feel like I'm inspired by the intellectual kind of amazingness of the East Bay, where I live in the Bay Area. I live in Oakland and got Berkeley here and Cal and, University of California. And there's just a lot of really brilliant people doing a lot of interesting things. And I also live in an extremely diverse community in which there are people of literally every race, every ethnic variety. I go to the grocery store and there's like an Ethiopian section and a Japanese section.
Right.
I love that about the Bay. I don't know that there are certainly parts of Philly, say, that are like that. So, maybe it's just that I moved from a really rural part of northern New York to San Francisco when I first moved here. I'm gay. Nice to be around a lot of other gays. And, it's kind of like I found this place. And I think the big thing, Matt, is that people are extremely relaxed. I mean, when I first moved here, I just couldn't believe the number of people who were saying hello to me. You pull up at a stoplight and you have a chat with the person in the next car. That's pretty extraordinary. I was just talking to a guy about his puppy the other day.
It's funny you say that. And that's, first of all, congratulations on being around people that you want to be around. Like, I think that's important. I think people don't say that enough. I think it's like taboo to say, I want to be around people I want to be around. I don't think that's wrong. I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting to centralize yourself around people that are like you or have similar interests or whatever the case might be. So number one on that. But number two, coming from our home area that we grew up in, it's a high speed, intense, oftentimes ignorant and angry populace. There's a lot of reasons to be pissed off in this area for some reason. But I'm moving to Missouri in 18 months. And,
oh, wow.
I'm going from urban cowboy to redneck ninja real quick. And, and I'm going all in too. I'm not dipping my toe in. And when I went out there, and it's a, cow country, and thing I noticed was everybody was intentionally waving to everybody. Not like a little, haha. It's a all arm out, full on handshake, right? Like, please see me. And I thought to myself, I'm like, at first I'm like, why are they waving to me? That's weird. But then everybody was doing it. I'm like, wait a second. They're just naturally nice people. And it is a big shift in mindset.
And that's when you move to a rural place is certainly often like that. I lived in a town of 500 people, and we moved there originally just as summer occupants. I had a husband who was a photographer, didn't work much in August, so we always spent part of the summer up there. And then we decided we're going to raise our kids here. We really like the values. We really want our kids to be self-reliant, which you really learn living in the country. And sure enough, they are, and they were. And as a result, everybody knew who we were. So we move into town, and pretty early on, my husband had to go away for a business trip, and I got walking pneumonia. And I had little kids with me, and lo and behold, the whole neighborhood started showing up with casseroles. I never told anybody, I was just limping along, doing what I could do. Knock, knock, knock. Here's somebody who wants to take our kids for a walk. Here's somebody who's baked bread for us. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
I'm looking forward to that. And I think that's going to be after, spent the last 32 years solving people's problems.
Right. So
I'm ready to not be leaned on. I'm ready for some peace and quiet. So, all right.
Good.
So you're probably not a veteran of the show of watching it and seen a lot of episodes, but I asked in 120 some episodes the same question. And I do it, and I explained to you before the show, but for those of you that are watching and maybe new, I asked one broad question. And the reason why I asked one question, and the question that I ask is because in law enforcement, I'm always going from an unknown to a known, whether I'm interviewing a victim or a suspect. I'm trying to understand who they are and where their brain's at so that I can start to gear my questioning to an area maybe where they're not expecting me to go, or maybe where they're expecting me to go. So I asked the same question of everybody, and the question I'm going to ask you is, who is Suzanne Fulter?
So glad you asked.
And it's such an easy question.
I know. I'm kind of hard to answer. I think the big thing about me, there are two big things about me, and one is I'm extremely fun-loving. I really like to have fun. I like to make people laugh, and I like to laugh. And I'm also a seeker. And all of my life, I have been somebody who just wanted to understand more about what makes us tick as human beings. And even when I was a little kid, I would go around trying to help all the adults around me solve their grievances or their arguments. I really wanted to create kind of peace and harmony. And I also wanted to understand a lot more about human life. And, I'm educated in art history, actually, which is a great thing to study if you're curious about what makes people tick, because art is a mirror of social movements. And particularly, you can see how the world has progressed through all these different periods, and how people have changed and evolved when you really look at art. And that got me kind of going on this path. And then I began to really take apart my own life and look at why I made the choices I made, or why I held the beliefs I held, or why I committed myself to the things I committed myself to. And what's really funny about this is my first job was writing ads. And I wrote jingles and TV commercials in a big agency in New York. And I always hated it. I always felt like I was manipulating people to buy, Twinkies and dish soap and yeah, people need dish soap, sure. But at the time, the slogan was, softens your hands while you do dishes.
Right.
But I knew the truth because I hung out at the agency, and it was the water that softened your hands. So an awful lot of advertising in those days in the 80s was still not regulated. And I always felt bad about that, right? So over time, the thing I loved about advertising is that I'm a writer, and I've been a writer since I was 10 years old. I wrote my first novel, which was all of 6 or 7 pages, and it was called The Chick from Fresno. Why The Chick from Fresno? I couldn't tell you, but there it was. I didn't even know Fresno. Like you said, I'm a Philly girl, but I just had to give it a shot. So fast forward to my 20s, I became a writer. And I really, really, really wanted to publish a book. I wanted a publisher to publish my book. And I wrote a novel, and I found an agent with my novel. And then I wrote another novel, and I became supremely lucky, and a major publisher published it.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of me understanding that I had a little voice in the world, and that I was supposed to really do something for other people, but I didn't know what it was. And I really didn't know what it was until significantly later, like 30 years later. And basically, I went through my career in marketing, and I pretty soon became an internet marketing consultant on the web. And I had by then published a self-help book called How Much Joy Can You Stand, which was about breaking through your self-imposed barriers and living the dreams you pursue. Like, really, what does it take to hang in there with these difficult to achieve dreams? Mm-hmm. And that kind of gave me a little taste, a little bit more specificity about what this thing is that I'm supposed to be doing. But the book did okay, not great. And then I got mired in internet marketing, and I looked up almost 10 years later, and I didn't like myself very much. And that was 2012. And in 2012, I had just ended, I had moved to California. I had come out as a lesbian. I had totally changed my whole life. And I had left my husband that I was with for 25 years. And I had raised at that point 2 kids, a daughter who was 20 and a son who was 16. And he had gone off to Taiwan for the year as an exchange student. And she was living in Austin, Texas, singing in blues bars. And, you know, we had a family meeting and I said, I need to go to California and move ahead with this plan. And I'm a lesbian. And they all said, okay. They were sad. They were very sad. But it was sort of like the family was already going in all these different directions. And so I just went with it. And I moved to San Francisco. I drove my moving truck out 3,000 miles west and learned about this completely different life and threw myself into it and went through some bumps and, you know, glories along the way. And 2 years later, it was almost exactly 2 years later, by then I had been through a relationship that had fallen apart and I had lost the apartment we were living in together and I didn't have a place to live and I had just closed my business. And I was kind of drifting around like, I don't really know what I'm doing here. I had my stuff in storage because I wasn't sure if I wanted to rent or buy or stay or, you know, what am I doing? I didn't know. And I get this, you know, I had arranged to eat dinner with my daughter in a restaurant up in San Francisco. And I took her to dinner and she was acting a little strange during dinner. She was somewhat unfocused and just not fully present. And, you know, she's ordinarily a very lively, fun, you know, engaged person. And she was an hour late and she was quite quiet and somewhat distracted and wouldn't really tell me what was going on. And I couldn't figure it out. And I arranged for her to get a ride home and I left the restaurant. 2 hours later, I get a call that she's in the emergency room having had a massive cardiac arrest. And this young woman was 22. She was in very good health. She had epilepsy. And what happens, maybe 1 in 1,000, very rare situation, epileptics can drop dead, basically, from a medically unexplainable cardiac arrest. And it was not clear this is exactly what happened to her, but in fact, it is what happened to her. And she was, you know, her heart was started again and she was on machines for 6 days until they could look at her brain. And she had extensive brain damage because she was alone without a heartbeat for 15 minutes. And so, you know, we had to take her off life support and she died. The truth is, her death was in a very strange and unexplainable way my rebirth. Because at the time,
I'm going to interrupt you real quick. I knew where you were going with that because unless you've been there, I've said this so many times on stages and sharing my brother's story. His death gave me life.
Yeah.
And unless you've experienced the worst tragedy you could possibly think of, you don't understand that. Like, it's hard to wrap your head around the most tragic event of your life actually giving you life. Like, it's just hard to wrap your head. I'm sorry. I just had to, it was just so.
I know. I love what you said. I love what you said because this has very much been my experience. I wrote a book about that period of time called Surrendering to Joy, because the joy for me was in receiving the gift of her legacy and helping build her legacy. And she was, by contrast, a dramatically different person from me. And what have I learned in the process? Well, everything that's really important in my life. So beginning with the fact that at the time of her death, and I had just closed my business, I had closed it because I was burned out. And I had been a workaholic for the last 10 years. And I had beaten myself into the ground. And suddenly I found I could no longer work. So the first thing that happened was I got massively stopped by the flow of life. And it's like everything stopped. I was getting ready to launch a new business. I was like, go, go, go. All I cared about was money. I just wanted to be successful. And suddenly all of that was utterly meaningless. I was mired in grief. I literally could not work, even if I wanted to. And I was really knocked back on my haunches. And a friend of mine who was a wonderful life coach, Andrea Lee, said to me, you have to stop. 2 months after her death, I was trying to get it going again. Now, mind you, I had just gotten divorced. I had gotten a generous divorce settlement. I had plenty of money in savings. I really didn't have to work, at least for a year or so, if I really was careful. Well, I ended up not working for 2 years. And when Andrea said, you just got to stop working, I said, no way, I can't stop working. Okay, maybe I'll do it for 2 months, max. And the minute I said that, my whole body just relaxed. I was like, oh yeah, that's what I needed. But the truth was, I needed a lot more than 2 months, and I couldn't even imagine giving that to myself. But at the end of a year, I had changed so much, and I had grown so much, and I had received so much, that I realized I needed to rest, to stop, to nurture myself, and really dive deeply into self-care. Because that's what I really got after Teal's death. For the first time in my life, Matt, I was taking really, really good care of myself. I hadn't been prior. I'd been ignoring myself and just being very externally focused and very driven and very task-oriented. Suddenly, I was asking myself the question, what do you need right now? And I was asking it a lot. And most of the time, I really didn't know, because I had never asked myself this question before. And sometimes I just needed to curl up in fetal position and sob. And other times I needed to go for a long drive or work out or have a smoothie or sit in the sun. But I wasn't working. I was doing this thing of just, not knowing how it was going to all come out. Not knowing turns out to be a very, very powerful and creative place. Because almost 2 years into this process of not knowing how I was going to make a living, not knowing if I could return to my business, I had tried 3 times. Each time it failed miserably, including once when I launched a program. It was a relaunch of an old program that had been very successful. I tried to relaunch it again, and I built a whole new online learning center and so forth. And some hacker took down the website, and they did it 6 more times to the point where malware was eating the hard drive of my webmaster. And there was like, okay, I surrender. I'm going to just not know. So 22 months after Teal's death, I get this call, and I'm invited to lunch with a distant relative who I hadn't seen for quite a while, who I guess had heard about my situation. He's an inventor, wealthy guy. Said, I would like to have fun in my remaining years on the planet, and I'd like to write fiction. Would you like a project writing novels with me? Now, I hadn't written a novel at that point for 15 years. So I was like, really? Novels? Wasn't sure I could do it, but I needed to do something, and I needed to make a living, and he was going to pay me for this. And I always enjoyed writing fiction, so I knew I'd like it. I said, let me think about it. And a few weeks later, I decided, you know what? I can do this. I will do this. And now I'm on the 9th novel for him.
Wow.
And I've been working on these novels for some years now, and they're a lot of fun. I've sold 10,000 copies. Wrote a series of trans man spy novels. I wrote a series of sort of books about groups of lesbians in Oakland. And now I'm writing a very funny book about a very posh street in the East Bay Hills and the dog walker who takes care of all the houses in the neighborhood. And it's a lot of fun. So I have been having a very good time writing these novels, and he's been having fun co-creating them with me. And, that's just all been great. It's been great.
There's a lot to unpack there, my friend. All right. Let's start with the elephant in the room. And I think, and I'm not talking about your daughter's death, I'm talking about the fact that you came out as lesbian. Because I think that's a very interesting, because I think it probably can unpack some things, because there's this, this hidden something inside of you, right? That you kept away, and you went down a life where you were leading a heterosexual life when you actually were a lesbian. And I think that's an interesting conversation to understand what that was like, being married, having a heterosexual life, raising children, being a wife to a man, like, and then that, the I need to make a change moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have a question that I want to ask that I'm dying to ask, but I want to hear the first part first. But explain to me what that was like for you, not on a day-to-day, but on an emotional struggle level, to be in that non-authentic self.
It's hard. It's hard because it's inauthentic, but what's really hard is I was lying to myself for most of that time.
Right.
I was pretending, it's just a little gay business in the background. It's not real, just ignore it. It'll go away. It was very unsafe for me to be gay in my family. My parents were homophobic, and my mother was kind of an old school, well-heeled woman from the upper crust of San Francisco, as a matter of fact. My great-great-grandfather was one of the original settlers of gold country and such. And then my mother and my father got together and moved east. And my dad was from conservative Nebraska and was really like, a Reagan Republican all the way. And, it wasn't that they had hate in their hearts. I think that it was that homosexuals very much treated as others. They were, they might be kind of entertaining to have it at a dinner party if they were gay men, but lesbians, no, just right. Avoid those people. And I remember when I was in my 20s going to New York to live in my first apartment, and I had these two older women who were housemates who had rented a room to me. And boy, were my parents worried they had a lesbian agenda, and
they're going to turn you.
They're going to turn me. That's it. And no, as a matter of fact, nothing could have been further from their minds. They needed somebody to fill the gap in the rent for the housemate who had suddenly bailed out on them. So that's what they were interested in. And I ended up also going to Seven Sisters College, where there were a lot of lesbians, and I was being hit on all the time, and I didn't even know it. I didn't even recognize it. I just was like, this does not compute. You just take that little gay bone in your body and you bury it deep. So coming to the place where I could finally come out, I was 52. I had really talked to my husband a lot about this, and my husband was and is a dear soul in my life who was extremely supportive and kind of an old hippie. So, he had no judgments. He was right. Like, what he literally said to me is, if you have to do this, then I will have to just deal with it. But you've got to be honest and you've got to be true to yourself. And could I
expect man to do that?
Yeah, no kidding. And he's just that kind of guy. He's got a deep heart. And I loved being married. I had a lot of fun. I loved being a mom. I loved being a soccer mom. I loved going to the little, soccer games in the Adirondack Falls with the leaves blowing around, and taking the kids skiing up at Lake Placid on the weekends, and, going to the skating parties out on the pond and moonlight skiing and all that stuff. It was like a fantasy parenthood along with a fantasy childhood. And fortunately, my son still lives up in Vermont, and he still lives that life and probably will for years to come. And his dad and I just had a really sweet understanding about the whole thing. And finally, there I was driving my moving truck to California, saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe it. I'm doing this," And there came a moment where I had picked up Teal actually in Kansas City. She was just so you know, Teal, my daughter, was an incredible free spirit. And she would pack up her little backpack and get her travel guitar and just hit the road. She'd go to the airport with some money in her pocket and just pick a place from the departure board and go.
My kind of person.
She just had no agenda. Didn't care if she was famous, didn't care if she was rich. What she cared about was being present in the moment and having fun. And she would go, she loved to travel, so she went all over the world by herself. She taught children in Ghana, and she went to Morocco a couple times. She worked on a farm in Belgium. She was, singing on the streets in Dublin and Copenhagen and Bangkok, and she just went all over the place. And no particular agenda. So I remember I picked up Teal in Kansas City, and we drove the rest of the way to San Francisco. And as we were driving over the Bay Bridge, we had the radio playing, and Aretha Franklin started singing "Freedom, Freedom, Freedom." It was just like this great, iconic moment in my life where I was setting myself free. So I took that as a sign. I said, I'm meant to be doing this. I'm going to make this work, and I can make this work. And of course, I was running a very successful business that allowed me to do this. I'd been able to save a lot of money. And it's an incredibly hellishly expensive place to move, but I was making it work, and I had an amazing apartment waiting for me. And I got there, and I had one friend who was a business partner, and he just showed up and really supported me, and it all worked like crazy. And San Francisco turned out to be a little bit of a rough landing, and partly because I got up to where, there were sort of some lesbian things going on in San Francisco, but it was almost entirely the homosexual scene there was almost entirely gay men in the Castro. And I was like walking around the Castro, like, are there any women here? And they're like, oh, honey, no. You have to go to the East Bay. You have to go to Oakland. You have to go to Berkeley.
That's very weird. That's not a known, like, that's not.
No.
You just assume gay, like you all just hang out together, right?
Exactly. And
big
then
park of gay people in California and San Francisco.
Exactly.
Right.
And I say to Jeffrey, who was my gay business partner, Jeffrey, what is it with the lesbians and the gay men? Why don't they live in the same place? It's like two warring factions almost. He's like, it's not warring. It's just like lesbians do lesbian, gay men do gay men. Very different cultures. Turns out that's true. And I think what I know now, having lived here for 12 years now, or no, 11 years, I've noticed apparently the AIDS crisis really brought the communities together. And I have met quite a few lesbians who worked in, they were volunteers in the AIDS wards, and they took care of guys they didn't even know. They would just show up at their door and start taking care of them, and they'd gone home to die. I mean, this was a calling of the arms, and it really energized the entire community to take care of each other. And that's what I really notice about the lesbian community that made me want to write my novels about that, because this is a very tight group of women, and they really show up for each other. I'm 63, and I have a wife who's 70, and her community that have really gathered around her for the last 35 years are aging, and they're between 70 and 80, a lot of them. And now they need each other more than ever, and they sure show up. It's extraordinary to me. I've never seen a community quite as connected as this.
I'm curious, being a heterosexual male, when we're going to go back to the pre-announcement of I'm gay to your family, or I'm a lesbian, I guess is the proper term, right? I don't know I don't know if my
Yeah.
vernacular is correct or not. If one's an umbrella or not, but did your husband, did he know? Like, did
He
he have
knew.
did he sense it? 'Cause I would have to guess that it's not, and not to stereotype anything, but you kind of, as a guy, if you're in a good relationship with your spouse, like I've been married 25 years, and I know my wife and she knows me, and there's no secrets. There's no, oh my God, I never knew that about you. Like, if you were married for a long time. So like, when there had to have been this little guy whispering in his ear, something, I think my wife.
Well, let me say, I was very honest up front in the very beginning of our relationship that I thought I might be bisexual, but I wasn't ready to explore it. Gotcha. So he came in and married me knowing this.
Understood.
And I felt it was only fair to say that to him. But I also didn't feel like I really knew much about it. You know, I mean, I hadn't really had any relationships or even sex with women. I just kind of instinctively thought that's my deal. So it's based on nothing, basically.
It's an inkling.
Yeah, and it was an inkling. I might be kind of bi, was how I put it. And, you know, he was like, okay, we're supposed to be married. It's fine. Whatever you are, it's fine.
I'm a firm believer in, and this is just through, in the life that I've lived, in the profession I've chosen, and the world I've seen, I believe people are meant to be in your life at moments and periods of time when they're meant to be in your life, and you need them, and vice versa. I don't believe everybody's a forever. I don't think there's enough. There are forever people, and I don't think everybody needs to be a forever. And I try to explain that I mentor a lot of kids, and you know, they go through a breakup and they're like, oh my God, my world's over. And I'm like, well, listen, no, that person was to help build this person that you're going to be seeking, your forever person. You're going to build that template of who that person is based on the things you learned from the failed, or the relationships that ended. The good and bad from each relationship is going to help build your want, need, and expectation of the person that's going to be your forever person. And I believe, based on just the very limited explanations you've given me, that your husband is a forever person. And I think in the beginning, God put him there so that you could have the understanding of who you are now, by having lived that life previously to this I am lesbian moment. And it gave you two children that each individually helped create the person that you became, and the confidence in which you were able to come out with it.
Well, absolutely. Because here's the thing. I had a sense that even if I was gay, I wanted to have children with a man, and I wanted to raise them with a man. It was 1988 when we got married. It was not safe to be gay. I was reading about the Stonewall riots and, you know, all that sort of stuff had been happening for the prior 20 years. And I was like, okay, better not to be gay. And while you're at it, have some kids with a guy, you know. And we have and had two great children. And Teal was, I really think one of the purposes of my life was to give birth to Teal and go through her birth and her life and her death, and to live out her legacy, which is really about being present and living in joy. And what I learned from that, which I was able to get to through a whole heck of a lot of self-care. And, you know, there are other reasons I think my son is in my life, and I won't get into them, but I have work for the rest of my life around sharing ways for people to connect and be healthy and be whole and be happy. And that is helping Teal live her legacy, because Teal wanted to be a healer, and she decided this about a year before her death. And she went through some fairly mystical experiences that she had around possible seizures. When you have, or you're going to get a seizure, you have something called a pre-seizure aura, and your energy changes, and the electricity pouring through your body changes, and you can at times have access to another higher realm, perhaps, if it exists, which in her mind it did. And she had a dramatic healing experience where she felt she was given a healing gift in Morocco, in a hostel, when she was checking out. And as a result of that, she put her 2 feet on the ground and said, I am meant to heal people. And the day after she collapsed, she was intending to start a course of study at the free college in San Francisco called City College. And she had put together this kind of esoteric blend of subjects. There was astronomy and Native American rituals and all sorts of things that she thought would teach her, quote unquote, how to be a healer. But she really got the big course that night prior to starting those classes, as she was collapsed in a bathroom with cardiac arrest. And she left behind a bunch of journals with all of these little notes written in them about how to live this wholer, more fulfilled, more healthy, more balanced, more humane life, humane to yourself and to others. And so I have made it my business to teach people about self-care and to talk about her and this healing legacy of hers.
Legacy is an important word, and not everybody thinks in that way. There's a lot of people that don't understand, and I'm a very intentional guy. I'm intense. I'm intentional. I'm a bit much to a lot of people, and I'm not for everybody. I have strong beliefs and opinions and convictions, and but I grew up the son of a hippie mom who, now God bless her, she's in a home with Alzheimer's, but our life in single mom raised me and my brother, and having experienced the breadth of diversity that I've had in my life, growing up in poverty, living in Section 8 housing, being the only white kid on my street, having a hippie mom, and basically Three's Company next door to us, and the one project we lived in, which was 2 guys and a girl that had nothing but have sex and smoke pot. And there's penthouses and hustlers everywhere in their apartment. That's where I would go after school when I was little, wait for my mom to come home, and there'd be a big bong in the middle of the coffee table, and they'd be smoking pot, but I learned a lot about a lot of different people, and I've absorbed, and I grew up with a brother who was autistic and stuttered, so he didn't speak. Severe stutter, like eyes rolling in the head, face contorting. So I've lived a very wide-ranging and far-reaching life. I've been to 40 countries. I've seen and astonishing things as a law enforcement officer, and in the military, and been in war, and been in combat, and been taking someone's life. I mean, I've hit all the major things that can fuck somebody up, right? So I look at the world a little bit differently than many people, but it has given me the ability to raise my kids with a profound understanding of the value of their worth, and the worth of their family name, and what it means to have an impact in the world and leave a legacy. And I grew up with a brother who didn't have any friends. The only person that his friends were me and my friends, and he was the weird kid who stuttered and acted weird. That's the way he was portrayed. And I didn't write a book to write a book. I wrote a book after having a mental breakdown, emotional breakdown, and I wrote 26,000 words over an 8-hour period overnight, just sobbing. And all these memories were coming back, and I was just writing them all down. And that's how the book became the book. And this was after it became a book, my way of saying this was my brother and I loved him and this was who I saw every single day. And now he has thousands and thousands and thousands of friends.
See, that's so great. That's so great, because maybe you heard this, Matt, when you lost your brother. But the thing I heard in grief groups was you either get better or you get bitter. And I felt when I walked into Teal's hospital room, now 3 hours after we had had dinner together, and there she was surrounded by, monitors. Her whole body was covered with insulated wrapping and, brain monitors and heart monitors and just so many machines going off at once. There she was. And I had this big kind of moment where I just understood she would die, I would go on, and my job was to fulfill her legacy. It was like a thunderbolt, boom. And like in the first minute of walking into that room. And from then on, I just surrendered, and your deal with your brother is similar. You surrendered to who he was and appreciated that about him and embraced it and invited your friends to do that, and then took on this cause of this is this guy and this is why he mattered.
Sadly, it took 13 years of me destroying myself before that happened.
Yeah. Well, it's a path. It's a path, right?
I tell people all the time, I would do that 100 times over again if it got me to where I am today. Like if I knew that I had to walk through that pit of hell for 13 years to get to where I am, I would do it every single time.
My sense is all of this came down for me when I was 55. Let's see, it was 9 years ago. Yeah, about 55. It all came down like that for me because I was meant to go through a profound transformation as a result of her death, but I wasn't ready for most of those years. You were not ready during that 13-year period, or perhaps
when it happened.
You were preparing yourself till your early 30s to be able to take this on. But, like life change and transformation through crisis is available to anybody, but not everybody wants to do it. It's much easier to just close your mind and say, that sucked and my life is terrible and, God doesn't like me, or whatever you tell yourself. So you become the victim instead of a co-creator.
And it doesn't sound like this, I'm sure it did on some level, but not probably at the depth that I experienced, but I was angry. Like I had no room for joy. And when you talked about, the book,
surrendering to joy, right?
I had no joy. I didn't feel worthy of it. I had survivor's guilt at the wazoo. I was angry at God. I was angry at my brother. I was angry at my parents. I was angry at everybody. And I just said, because it was this surreal. My brother was perfect in a spiritual way because he didn't have opinions of hate or judgment, or his brain didn't work that way.
Yeah.
And I was so angry that somebody who was simply just a piece and a cog of the world, who was just bringing one little speck of perfectness to everyone that he met, that actually appreciated his joy, that he was snuffed out. And in my mind, I said, how could you take, and he was just starting to figure some things out, like growing into something outside of this weird kid that everybody made fun of who stuttered. And he was starting to become that. And then he died. And I thought he never had a chance to fully live. And then what I found out was, after I wrote the book, and my brother worked at a summer camp, Christian summer camp, and he would cut grass and do stuff like that. But he would live there. He would stay in one of the cabins. And I never went to the camp. I didn't know these people. I didn't experience any of the events. But afterwards, I had all these people buying the book and then writing me emails or sending me letters explaining their Andy moments. And my brother touched thousands of lives in 2.5 month periods of time, where whether it was kids with learning disability or special needs that were coming to the camp for a week, and the parents recognizing that my brother was as well, and how he interacted with them, and how their kid looked forward every summer to come back and see Andy, whatever it was. They built a gymnasium at the camp and named it after my brother. And I realized my brother lived more in 21 years than most people live in 100. And what I spent 13 years being angry about was because the lens by which my relationship was with my brother, I was his protector. That's what my job was. And the person I saw needed me to take care of him, and needed me to protect him, and needed me to make sure he was okay, that he was okay. He didn't need that from me. I thought he did, and maybe he secretly wanted me to be that way, but he actually lived a life where he had relationships with people, and on such a higher level than I ever thought he was capable of.
See, I think that's so, that's so interesting that is what the big characteristic is about your brother, because that's exactly the way Teal was. Teal harbored no ill will, period. She just loved people. And she was funny and fun and engaging, and a very beautiful girl as well. And, just kind of goodness personified.
Right.
So I think when an Andy or a Teal get taken out, there is a real spiritual purpose, which is, look at this. Life can really be unfair. Life can be dramatic and shocking. Look within. What could you learn from this extraordinary person?
And I think, I want to learn a little bit more about what did Teal's passion and her drive to become a healer, and her overall joie de vivre, or love of life. How did that, I'm jealous of you that you had this surreal spiritual moment where you just knew that she was going to die, and that you were now responsible for continuing her legacy. I wish I had that, and I got it, but it just would have been great to had it immediately. I think, but obviously my journey required 13 years of suffering for me.
Well, yeah.
But how did that work?
Already had 13 years of suffering. Okay,
and
man.
You were
I had given 50, at the office. Right. Okay, man.
So what was the clarity? And I talk about, when I do speaking events and talk about my brother, I talk about the clarity that came that morning I came up from writing those words that night before. What was the clarity that you got? Was it that moment when you had that feeling, or did the clarity come after a certain period of time after she passed? Like, what was that clarity moment?
This was the other kind of companion moment. There were two big moments in the hospital, and that was the first one, but the second one was even more profound. And that was 3 days into her coma. She had been put into a coma to keep her from moving. And, so there she was on the bed, motionless. By then she was on a ventilator. She was surrounded by all this, machines and wrapping and such. And I was holding her hand, and I was alone in the hospital room with her. And I had this deep, deep, profound spiritual experience. And I felt, I'm not a religious person, but I felt the presence of a huge, universal, benevolent, loving energy, just like totally surround me and her. And it was coming out of her body into my hand. And it came out of nowhere, and it was like, the heavens parted and the angels sang kind of thing.
Yeah.
And at that moment, my former husband and my son came into the room where they'd been having lunch, and it was now my turn to go to lunch. So I left the room and I walked out into this hospital, which was San Francisco General. And it's a hospital, it's a public hospital open to anyone. And there are a lot of homeless people, there are med students, there are pregnant mothers, there are immigrant families. There's just all kinds of people through this whole hospital. And I'm walking the halls and I'm looking around, and I'm seeing everybody in deep clarity. I am looking at people and I'm seeing everything that's going on in their lives and what their emotional state is and where their stress is. And it's just like I could see into people so clearly. And I had never had this experience before. And it was really the essence of what Teal was all about, which is what she called the unified field of love, this place where we all meet in the middle and we all connect. And I saw it. I really saw it. And I went down a hallway to call some of her friends and let them know what was going on. And I saw this homeless guy standing at the beginning of the hallway and, kind of nodded to each other. And I went down to the other end of the hall and I called one of her friends and I told him what was happening, asked if he wanted to come to the hospital before she passed. And when I got off the phone, the homeless guy was looking at me and I just went up to him and I said, my daughter's dying. He said, yeah, I know, I heard you. And he said, I have a daughter. I said, do you? He said, yeah, I got to go visit her, don't I? I've got to go visit my daughter. I said, you do need to visit your daughter. And it was this like, that sounds hard to believe and hard to explain, but I just like felt so merged with this person. Right. It really didn't matter who he was, didn't matter that we didn't know each other. All I felt was profound human connection. And I was feeling it with every person around me. And that went on for some time. And that was the big takeaway from Teal's life, is that we are all deeply connected, even when we think we're, can't possibly understand each other. We can't trust each other. They're out to get me. They're destroying, this country or whatever people are saying about each other in this particular moment in history is, this was the deep truth about that.
I've recently gotten into, I'm not a religious person, even though my stepfather is a pastor. Mm-hmm. But I don't go to church. I'm not a church guy, but I am deeply connected to God, and I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus, and I have a deep connection with that part of my soul. But I'm a seeker, just like you. I'm always asking questions. I'm not a trusting person by nature. That's an earned thing for me. But I'm always looking for answers to things that either are unanswerable for most people, or have multiple answers depending on the interpretation. Mm-hmm. So I'm always trying to see if I can, and as a human behavior guy, I'm always trying to solve complex human behavior problems. And as a cop, I literally have 5 minutes to fix your problems, or else you think I'm the worst person in the world. So like, that's the chaos is kind of my sweet spot. So I recently got into like 5D consciousness and understanding energy and how energy is a real thing. Mm-hmm. Like if you walk in a room and you can tell it's tense, you're like, boy, you can cut the tension here with a knife. Like there's a reason why that feeling happens. And then trying to understand more about that energetic connection between human beings and how certain kinds of energies can improve your life or hurt your life. And just, I'm fascinated by it, because I do believe in both the spiritual and the energetic components to happiness and joy, and having that understanding of value and why you're here and what is the whole purpose of this experiment of being alive, and just really taking a deep dive into that. And when you're telling the story about the energy transmission from your daughter to you, I've experienced similar, not that specific, but similar energy transfers between humans, me and another person, and at different points in my life. And I think that's a real thing. And I love, first of all, I love your courage. I love the fact that you were committed to being a mom and being a wife, and then honest enough with everyone to live your true self. And then I'm thankful that your daughter gave you this gift. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. I think we tend to find death to be taboo. My children, my wife lost her sister to cancer. And so we're both only children who lost a sibling now. And my kids have had to live through that. And I think in order to truly live, you have to experience loss. I don't think there's enough contextual experiences that can create that appreciation value. I think the only way you truly can understand the value of life and the importance of taking those moments to say I love you to someone, or to move to California, or to come out as lesbian, whatever, that you have to at some point in time really appreciate how valuable life is, and how we're not in control of that end date. And that's why the podcast is called 2 Dates and a Dash. The date you're born, the date you die, and the dash is the life that you live. Right. And I think it's important to understand that you're not in control of the end date. And the only thing you have in control of at your disposal is the dash. And I think you're living the living hell out of yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
So where can people find more about you? Website, social media? I know you mentioned a couple books. If you want to talk about them again, where they can find out, where to buy all your novels you're writing, and the book, maybe even the 7-pager, The Chick from Fresno. You never know.
That's not for sale.
Let's put that. Yeah.
All right. So my books and my podcast are on my website at Suzanne Falter, SuzanneFalter.com. Or people can Google Suzanne Self-Care, probably find me. I have a podcast called Self-Care for Extremely Busy Women, and I'm the author of The Extremely Busy Women's Guide to Self-Care. And all my fiction is also on my website at SuzanneFalter.com.
I like simple, right? So put everything in one box. I like that.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of that. Hang tight. We're going to talk off air. But I just wanted to close out the show here. Everybody, thank you for tuning into this really powerful, really inspirational, and educational episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. Thank you to Suzanne Falter for being an amazing guest, and for her courage and strength, and all the things that she's currently trying to accomplish with the dash that she is living. And once again, if anybody wants to learn more about me, go to mattcubbler.com. You can buy a copy of the book, A Brother's Love, a Memoir there. I truly do appreciate anybody that takes the time to read it. It's a personal story. It's not fiction. It's my life. Growing up with my brother, Andy, and I'm the greatest accomplishment of my life. So thank you, everybody. God bless. Go out and be kind to one another.